folks, Tony here from Green Room, and today I'm just going to be going through the process of inking, shading and finishing off a sketch in Procreate. I'm going to be using our brand new Ultimate Ink brush set that's available exclusively through DesignCuts, and if you haven't already checked it, I highly recommend it. Well over 100 brushes, and there's bound to be something for everybody in there, and covers a huge range of styles of inking. So yeah, so go and check it out. And if any of you guys already have the brush set, I've included Procreate files so that you can follow along with this tutorial. So it will be a Procreate file that will have the initial sketch in it, and I'll probably put in some file versions at different stages of the process. So you'll be able to follow it along and use the exact brushes that I'm using. Okay, let's go. Okay. I've opened up the basic file, and all that's in it is just one layer. It's just a sketch, so nothing particularly extraordinary about it. The sketch was done using the free toolbox that came with it, using the Gritty Sketcher, which is my favorite one. So sometimes when I'm sketching, I like to use something that's a nice bright color, like a pink or a purple, for the simple reason that when it comes to inking, it's a lot easier to be able to see exactly what it is that you have done and have yet to do. But that doesn't mean that you can't do sketching in the typical kind of grey, black graphite. But what I do when I do that is I will often create an extra layer. On top of that, I'll pick a colour like a light blue, something like that, and I'll drag that in to cover the whole layer, and then I'll change the mode to screen. So you end up with all of your lines nicely visible, but there's enough of a difference in them so you can see exactly where you've inked and where you haven't inked. So that can be kind of handy. So right, let's start inking. I am going to use the ink pack. I'm going to use the one brush, which is my favorite one. So it's very handy because you can do very thin lines that thicken up nicely. And even if you use it at a larger brush size, you're able to get those thin to thick lines very consistently. And it's good for being able to hatch and things like that. You can get very thin lines and very dark ones, very heavy ones. So it's very good for being able to do a lot of inking without having to even change your brush size, never mind your brush. Okay, so we'll start in around the eyelashes. That's one of the reasons I like this brush. It's very good for being able to ink eyelashes and eyebrows and things like that. So you can see you can get a nice natural taper with a sort of a flicking action. This is very good for doing kind of more subtle lines. And obviously there's better ways of quickly filling in larger areas with any sort of solid colour, but just for now I'm going to stick with this inker. Okay, so I'll probably speed up little parts of this video, because I think a lot of it, you'll get the idea of it very, very quickly, but I'll stop whenever there's anything I think is worth mentioning. One thing I will mention is when it comes to doing curves and things like that, I think the most important thing is to be able to get your hand in the correct position to start off with. If you are trying to, get a subtle curve like this, you lose all the control because of it's a very unnatural direction for your hand to move. Whereas if you position it so that everything is pivoting from your wrist, you'll be able to get something that's much more natural with very, very little movement. And it's a nice little kind of slight automatic taper that's on the brush as well, the one inker, so you can even ink in sections if you like, and it's very easy to get continuity across it. So when it comes to the likes of the nose, it's a good way of illustrating a lighter line and a darker line. So with the one stroke, let's just put a little bit more pressure on, and you'll be able to get a little bit more interest in those lines. For this ink, I have decided that the lighting is going to come from mostly at the top, pretty much straight down, a little bit over to the left. So all that'll mean is that for some of the lines, such as on the girl's arm, it's often good to have a a slightly lighter line on the side that's going to have the more light, and a slightly darker on the other side. So it's just a minor thing. I mean, we'll go and do another pass on the inking layer and do an ink detail layer as well. But it's good to kind of get those as pretty much spot on at the start. Usually with a cartoon or a comic style, I tend not to use any of the features that Procreate has for making perfect geometric shapes or lines. But sometimes I think it's worth doing. Just in case you don't know, that's where you draw the shape that you're looking for without lifting the pencil off, and then hold at the end and it'll snap into a shape. I think for certain man-made objects, it's good to have things that are accurate. I think that's pretty much all the main lines done. So I'm going to create a second layer, and this is going to be my secondary lines for inking, where I'm going to have any absolute blackout areas, and I'm also start to add in a little bit of extra detail as well. The light is coming mainly from overhead, so there would be a shadow under the chin and the jaw. Some of these lines, they're just to help the transition out of the dark into light. Example, I've done a few hatches for just a little bit of a suggested shadow under the knee, but it's not very well done, but that's no problem. I can just go back and I can use the eraser to get a much nicer curve. Now I have it positioned in a less than perfect place, so I'll just use the freehand selection tool and select that, and now I can move it up a little bit. Okay, that should do the trick. Do the same on the other knee. Sometimes it's better to overdraw these as well, because it's a little bit easier to be able to go back and get the curves that you need. I think I have my second layer detail of ink done there. So yeah, so like it's not a huge amount that I did, but you can see when I turn it off and on, it does make a little bit of difference and starts to add a bit more depth into everything. So I think I'm going to go ahead and add in some more detail. I'll just put this on a separate layer in case it doesn't work out, but I'm going to go and use one of the fill patterns that comes with the brush set, and I'll try Patch Hatch Light. I think it's always good to get as much information and the inks on first. You don't kind of have to overcompensate with more complicated colors. But anyway, but let's try this. So for the trainers, yeah, this is just a pattern brush. You can change the size of the brush, but the pattern will stay the same size. So it's very useful for being able to fill in specific areas. So let's just yeah, I'll just draw this in and see if it looks half decent, and if it does, we'll keep it. So yeah, and I think that adds something to it. Just gives a little bit more detail, because otherwise it's going to look quite flat. Even if you put in some shading on it, it's still not going to look very interesting. So I think that does give it a little extra look of something. One of the other little things you can do with the brush pack as well is you can actually rotate the canvas and draw the pattern over again, so you can build up different levels of shading as well. So that's quite funky. And I also want to put something on the socks here as well. I think just for the time being I'm going to create another layer just in case I decide I don't like it. Yeah, I'm going to use the parallel gritty, and this is another one of the patterns that repeats like this. So I think that could be alright for part of the sock, so we'll try it. So I'm just going to throw it in first, and if I think it's okay, which I do, I'll just go and clean up the edges. Okay, no, I think I like that. So now just to recap, I've got 4 layers of ink and I don't need that many. I'm just going to simplify things a bit. So I've got my main lines here, which I'm going to go and rename now. So I'll call this ink main. And then I've got my second level of detail, and then the 2 pattern layers here. So I'm going to merge all 3 of those together, and I'll call those ink detail. Okay, so I think we can lose the sketch layer now, so I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to get rid of that blue layer I was using just to overlay. So I think we are ready to go and start adding some color into this. Okay, so ready to start adding in some color. There's a couple of ways to add in colors. I'm going to do it a kind of a semi-manual way. So I'm going to start off and I want to put in a layer that's just flat colors for the skin parts, so face, arms, legs. I'll add in my layer, and for this I'm going to go to the shade brush set, and the 2 best brushes for this are either the blocker or the cell color. So I'll use the cell color for now. So probably the best way and easiest way is if you don't need to color all the insides in, but if you just kind of do the outside areas. And once you've got a kind of a blocked off area that doesn't have any empty lines in it, you can start dropping in the fill just to finish that off. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to continue doing that. So I'll do an outline for a section and then I'll drop in the color. Okay, I have my skin blocked in. I'll rename that skin. I'm going to create another layer and I may as well rename that now. I'll call that dress. And I'm just going to pick a color. Again, it doesn't matter very much at this point. Now I'm just looking, I might be able to use a different technique to color this in. I'm just going to hide my details layer for a second. If you have a layer like an ink layer and all of the lines are closed off, you can actually turn that into a reference layer, and that means that if I go to drop this in here, it'll use the lines on the reference layer as the guides as to where the edges should be. And now I know that when I try to drop it in here, the ink is going to spill into here because there's no line closing that off, and there's also no line there, so it's going to spill over. So there's a couple of ways of working at that. You can draw the lines in temporarily and then rub them out if you want, or you can just, put it in manually. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to quickly ink that manually. Okay, so it's starting to take shape. I'm going to do another layer, and I'm going to do the hair, eyeballs, lips, and I think I'll do the socks and the white parts of the shoes as well. Now I'm just going to temporarily change the background color to something, it doesn't really matter what, just something that'll give me a bit of contrast so I can make sure that I'm getting everything inked. And I will choose, let's try sort of a light color for the hair for now. Done. I'm going to call that flats detail because it's got a whole lot of different layers in it. And finally I'm going to do one more blocking in, and then we can get into the fun part. Right, we have all of our flat colors done. I have also on that headphone layer, I've turned it into a headphones and rudders layer just to put the two greys on it. So I've also filled in the color part of the Converse style trainers. So this is where the fun part starts on it. There's a lot of ways that you can approach doing this, so I'll show you a couple as I go. So let's start off with the dress, for example. One of the reasons that I have all the flats separated is so we can do a little bit of experimentation. So for example, if I create a new layer above the dress, and then if I turn that into a clipping mask, that will make sure that anything I draw on the new layer is going to stay within the shape of the layer below it. So I'm going to go and pick, let's see, I'm going to take a fill pattern, and I will use this abstract pattern that's in that Ultimate Ink pack. And now because it's a pattern, I can just paint freely and that will fill everything in. And there you go, you've already got something that's fairly usable. But I don't really like that, or suppose I want to try something that's different as well. I'm going to create another layer and I'll try something a little bit different. So let's say I want to pop in, let's see, some halftone shading. I'll try this halftone bold pattern, and I'll use a black as well. So again, I can draw underneath it, and I'll pop it in where I think the shadows would be on this as well. And so it's great. You can see that I haven't gone outside the lines or anything like that because it's all clipped. So you can see in just a couple of seconds it's already made it look a little bit more three-dimensional, and it gives it a bit of a retro aesthetic as well. But again, I don't want to use that either, so I'm going to get rid of that one. I think for this I am going to go for something like, I'm just going to kind of colour it in with one of the markers. I'm going to start out, I'm going to change the base colour of the dress. I don't really like that, so I'm going to select that layer. I'm going to go up to my adjustments, my hue, saturation and brightness, and choose the layer, and I'm going to pick a better colour. So I think I'm going to keep it quite dark and very nearly black, so there's a little hint of purple in it, but it is mostly going to be black, so I think I'll just stick with that. Okay, and I'll set up my clipping mask layer above it, and I'm going to choose a marker from the shaders. Let's see, I'll take the marker shader and I'll go with black. So these work very similarly to markers, that you need to go over them a few times in order to build up the colours. So it means that you're able to build up kind of interesting textured colouring on it without any effort really. And you know, there's a nice grain in there as well, and it just means that it's not going to be just a basic boring black. It's going to have a bit more detail in it. So it's quite subtle. I don't know how well that you'll pick that up on the camera, but it gives it a little bit more life. And I can go in, I can add a slightly lighter colour on there if I want. Maybe reduce the opacity, and just to put in a couple of highlights where the light might catch that a little bit more than other parts where the sort of pleats are. So I don't think it needs much more than that, just something that's nice and subtle. So let's see, I'll jump to the skin, I'll create a layer above that, create a clipping mask. For this I'm going to do something a little bit different. I've got a different type of shader, texture shaders. There's a whole bunch of them in there as well. And my favourite is probably the texture medium slow one. That's where the colour takes a little while to build up. So I will choose a colour that's a little bit darker than the skin. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I think that'll do. It's not too harsh. Maybe make it slightly darker. Okay, so I'll start to add a bit of texture in the skin, and you can see that just builds up really nicely, really slowly. Now I'm going to exaggerate it a bit initially because I'm going to make it a bit lighter in a second, but I'm just doing this so I can see where I'm putting it in. So as I go, you know, I can erase anywhere I don't want that. Hopefully you can see that very quickly I'm able to build on the ink lines that were there to give it a 3D look. Okay, so as I was saying, this is a little bit harsh, so I'm going to reduce the opacity on it. I might even switch the mode to something like multiply. That'll have an even better interaction. I want to tidy up some of the shading that I did on the face. So instead of I've got a whole load of different erasers that I can use, so I could, you know, go into the toolbox and pick one of the gradual soft or the brushy ones. That'd be quite nice. Or a neat little trick as well in Procreate is if you're painting with a particular brush, you're able to hold down the eraser and it will swap the current brush over to be the eraser. So that's a handy little one as well. But for this one, I want to use my own, and I'll use the gradual soft, so I can fix that line a little bit. Okay, I think that's a little bit better. And I'm going to do a second layer, and I'm going to keep with the same brush, but this time I'm going to use a light colour that's fairly close to white, and I'm going to use that to add in some highlights. Make sure it's a clipping mask as well, keep it neat. So this would be on the parts obviously closest to the light. And again, it still has that texture in there that it means it's not just a boring flat colour, there's a little bit more to it. Okay. And then the final thing I'm going to do on that skin layer. Now you can do this on the overall image at the end. I like to kind of treat each of my color shadings as a 3-step job. That I'll do the shadows, the highlights, and then I'll do a special layer, which will be the noise magic brush. And this, I recommend using it in either the overlay or the soft light modes, and you can do it with black or white or pretty much any color or some version of what you're using. But certainly, I think I find it works best with one of the extremes. So I'll try it with black first, and I'll give you a look at it. Now it's going to look very harsh when I first put it on, but I want to do it like this so that I can show you the noise that it adds. So it doesn't look very pretty right now, but if I switch the mode, the layer blend mode, to one of the one of the recommended ones like overlay, you can see that now that's given that a lovely texture, and it even helps blend the shadows, the highlights and the base color together that little bit more. So it just gives it a little something extra, and it's just not a straight up flat drawing. So it really is just like a little magic brush that you just give a once over towards the end, and it just helps everything just pop to life and gel together. Sometimes I'll kind of do an extra special layer, and I'd only really do this on the skin really, where I'm going to stick with that noise magic brush. I'm going to go with the overlay, I think. Do you know what? I'm going to try and add for this one, because this can be a nice little effect to get those little highlights to pop out. Again, I want this to clip onto all the skin. Similar to the other effects, I'm going to dial that back a little, and I'm going to change the opacity so it's not quite as strong. If I turn these all off, you should be able to see now that there's a point to putting all these in. So that's just a flat, that's with a little bit of shadow, that's with a little bit of highlight, that's with the noise magic with a little bit of dark, and that's just with the add layer for the highlights, just to give it a little pop at the edges. So I think that works quite nicely. Let's move on to the hair. Flats detail, that's the layer I have that has multiple different parts in it. Straight away, I don't really like the hair color on this, so I think I'm going to go for something that's a little bit different, that might match in as well a little bit better with the rest of it. I'm also going to change this background color to something a little bit more neutral, because I think that's quite overpowering. So there we go, we'll use that. Okay, now because I've got multiple parts on this layer, I want to make sure that I'm only selecting the hair itself. So I will use the select tool, freehand, and I'll go around the hair. So I only have that selected. Now I'll go into my adjustments again, hue, saturation, brightness, and I think I'm going to give this girl some nice red hair. Okay, I think I like that as a color. I've just realized that I missed out a couple of little strands there, so I'll add them back in. For this one, I'm going to show you the cell highlight and the cell shadow. So same process again, I'm going to create a clipping mask. But these cell quick shadows and quick highlights, they're meant to be able to give you the shadows or the highlights with a very cell shader style, and you don't have to worry very much about the colors and how they're going to work and how they're going to interact with layers below. For example, I'm choosing black, but when I draw on this, you'll see that it's not black, and that's because I've already set up the brushes to be able to be in the correct blend mode and to also have the correct opacity, so you don't even need to think about them. So it's a way of being able to add in very quick shadows. So you can see I've done that in black, but it's coming out a nice shade that's based on the color that's below it. I'll also create another layer, and I will create a clipping mask. This time I'm going to use white, and I'm going to use the quick highlights version of the cell brush. Just to give you a quick example, if I go to change my hue and saturation of this layer, and I change the color to something else, you can see that the shadows and the highlights that I've drawn in using those special cell brushes, they'll adapt with it and they'll change with it, and you don't need to worry about anything at all. I don't want to do this, so I'm going to cancel it, and I'm going to keep the hair color as it is. I'm going to create one more layer on this, and I'm going to use that magic noise overlay one because I'm quite addicted to it, because it really does help finish everything off. I'll change the layer mode to overlay, and I'll paint in. Yeah, I think I prefer it a little more multiply in that one. Okay, I think I'll add one of these onto the dress as well. You can see the layer count is growing, but when you think about it, it's still should be quite simple to get around, because you've got your block color, then your shadows, highlights, and then any special layers you might have with it. And obviously, if you get to a point where you're happy with it and you think it's going to look fine, you can merge them down. You don't need to keep loads and loads of layers. But it is good to hang on to them as long as you have them. It is one of the big benefits of illustrating in digital, so you may as well make use of it, I think. So I'm going to just put something quickly on these socks, for example. Instead of putting another layer on it, I'm going to alpha lock it. So that means that it'll have the same effect. I'll be able to still draw, and it'll keep inside the places that I have in that layer. But I don't feel the need to have multiple layers for this, because it should be very easy to do what I'm going to do, which is I'm just going to use the basic soft one. What else have we got? Yeah, I want to darken that up as well, so I never put that in. I'll just go to one of the layers I already have there. And I want to liven up the background a little bit as well. So we're really getting into the final finishing touches here. I'll add a layer above the background color, and for this I'm going to go in and use one of the wash shaders. So there's a few wash shaders, and they all operate a little bit like watercolors. When you apply the paint to the page, it kind of blotches as though it's got water and it's being absorbed by the paper, and you're able to paint. Then as you move it, you can kind of smudge it in with itself and with any other colours that are there as well. So it's a nice way of creating a little finishing touch in it. And you can also do up some very interesting kind of watercolour style or concept art styles as well. And it could just be a nice way just to put little splashes of colour in. I think just something quick and easy like that, and give it a nice little touch to it. I think I'll tweak the background color a little bit more. I'll still keep it neutral, but I think that should do the job. And let me see. Okay, I think I'm going to add a texture to the overall. So with the Ultimate Ink brush pack, there is a free bonus texture pack that comes with a selection of paper and canvas and distressed textures and stuff like that you're able to drop into any illustration. And it'll work in Photoshop, any of the Affinity software, stuff like that. It's very easy to use, and it's all been color corrected and color graded so that you only have to pretty much change the layer mode, the blend mode and the opacity, and it's ready to go. So to give you an example, I have these saved onto my iPad. So I'm going to select the top layer so it goes on top of everything else. I'm going to go to the Actions menu, add, insert a file, and I'm going to choose the scratched cardboard tint one. Zoom out so I can see what I'm doing. I'll make it the size to cover the page. Yeah, I think that will do. Now the quickest way to use it is just to switch to multiply, and already you should be able to see that there's a big difference in how that looks. It just adds a lot of interest to it, I think. So I'm going to reduce the opacity a little bit so it's not quite as strong. I mean, there's no right or wrong way to use these. You can use any layer mode that you like once you're happy with it and you think it looks good. That's great. For me, I often pop them in as a multiply layer, and then I'll duplicate that. I'll change that to probably a screen, and I will drop that right down as well. And what that will do is that'll catch a lot of the darker colors and wash them out a little bit, so there'll be more texture. So there's the before and after that. So again, adjust the amount of that to your own personal tastes. I think maybe as one little final touch, I'm going to create another layer above the dress, and I want to put in some sort of pattern. So I've been playing around with the one of my monoliner brushes that's in the pack. It's a dotty monoliner. It's meant for being able to draw lines, usually sort of small inked stuff. But I'm going to see if I can repurpose this and use it just to create individual dots, just to give the girl a bit of a polka dot dress. So I think that maybe might make it a little bit more interesting as well. So thanks so much for watching. Hopefully that was useful to some of you out there. If you haven't already checked out the Ultimate Ink brush pack on DesignCuts, please do go and have a look at it. There's well over 100 brushes split into multiple categories. You've got your inkers, your shaders, your stroke patterns, fill patterns, and there's loads of bonus content in it as well. And for any of you guys that have already gotten the pack and you've been drawing along, I'd love to see what you guys have done. And indeed, anybody that's put anything together with the brush pack, make sure to hit me up on Instagram. There'll be a bunch of links below with some information, and yeah, so feel free to reach out, show us what you're doing, and let us know if you have any suggestions. And thanks very much.